gentlemen, welcome. It's a pleasure to see so many of you attending today's debate. Thank you so much for that. My name is Sebastian. I'm responsible for security and defense at the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. It's my pleasure to be your host today. But before I introduce you a bit deeper into today's topic, it's my pleasure to give the floor to a representative from the other organization with which we are doing this together, which is the European Liberal Forum. Please, a warm welcome for Iris Meyer, who's a board member of ELF.
Well, I'm extremely happy to welcome you on behalf of the ELF, the short, but I hope very snappy, exchange of views for the future of peace. And why do I say the future of peace? Because we are living in the upside world where you need weapons, in fact, in order to keep the peace. It's called deterrence, and we use this a lot in Estonia and Eastern border, where I'm coming from. The National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence report is stating that, and I quote to be clear, artificial intelligence-driven military systems are not only ethical, but also essential for the future US military operations. That's the statement. This is not exactly the understanding of other international organizations and NGOs. For example, 2018, United Nations adopted a resolution which calls the international ban on lethal autonomous weapon systems, and the same position was also adopted by the European Parliament last year. At the same time, we witness how artificial intelligence helps to improve the state security, strengthen cybersecurity, helps to cooperate with allies, and enlarge the scientific research, and eventually also minimize civilian casualties in the war zones. And now, imagine the situation, the machines fighting against the machines without any human being present, and this always makes me wonder, why don't we just deploy the best video game players in Europe and send them out there against our enemies' video game players? For sure that would kind of bring it to the minimum to the number of civilian casualties, and also would release quite some budget for the other areas of life, like we could improve education, go climate neutral, or cure cancer. Well, but then let's leave the joke aside and agree that even if rationally we can accept the simple fact that artificial intelligence and development of it will shape the future of power. And it also drive the advancements in other areas like health, again I said education, economic, and also defense. There are still principal questions we need to find answer. And those are, well, I will mention here too, because I don't want to ask all the questions that you might have. Which functions can autonomous weapon system perform without violating fundamental principle of humanity and ensure the compliance with international humanitarian law? And also, where are the red lines where the policymakers have to draw? And I hope we will find today some answers for those questions, and of course there will be more questions. And with these words, I'm very happy to give the floor for the experts. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Iris. So the reason why we have scheduled this debate for today is, among others, that last week was a meeting of an important UN body, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which is the UN body which should be responsible to negotiate a ban or a regulation for autonomous weapons, especially lethal autonomous weapons. This same body has regulated other weapon systems in the past which are considered to be particularly injurious or indiscriminate, like for example landmines or incendiary weapons. And this panel has now debated since 2014 if and how autonomously or intelligent weapon systems should be regulated. The European Parliament has made a statement on that. It has been very clear, with a clear majority in 2018, that there should be a ban on all lethal autonomous weapon systems last year. Still, there is only one EU country which has clearly spoken out in favor of such a ban, which is Austria. And last week's debate, please come in. Last week's talks came to the result that the parties basically decided that we should continue talking. This is where we are when it comes to the international regulation of lethal autonomous weapons. The robotics philosopher Isaac Asimov famously said more than 7 decades ago that science produces knowledge faster than society produces wisdom. So that being said, one of the questions today, of course, is how can we make sure that our wisdom matches our technological knowledge? What's at stake for the EU, and how should the EU position itself when it comes to lethal autonomous weapon systems? Those are the questions that we'd like to debate with our speakers today. And I'm especially happy that we have this panel. I'd like to introduce you our panelists from left to the right. Neumann, who's an MEP for the Green Party. She has only been a member of the European Parliament since May, but her track record in security defense is much longer. Thanks for coming today, Hannah. Then we have Frank Sauer from the University of the Federal Armed Forces in Munich. He's researching and teaching on the topic, and he has been discovered by the German television as a as a good explainer of the topic, which is why we're looking forward to your introductory briefing, which we will have in a few seconds. Thanks. Let me introduce you to Samira Rafaela, who is also a member of the European Parliament of the Renew Group. She represents Dutch Liberal Party D66, and she is especially interested in technology, AI, and in the ethics of AI. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Raluca Csernatoni, who works for Carnegie Europe and is a guest professor at the Free University of Brussels. And her focus as well as a researcher is on AI, security defense, and EU security defense policies. Thank you, Raluca, for being here today. It's not only about those four, it's also about you. We would like to engage you as much as possible. We'd like to give you the opportunity to join this discussion, and in order to do so, we would like today deploy this tool called Slido. You can ask your questions via Slido. You can also vote other people's questions on Slido, and we will have 2 polls where you will be able to voice your opinion. So please get out your smartphones.
Sorry.
Go to the website slido.com and type in the event code "We Are the Robots." Yes, this is an homage to Kraftwerk, as you might have noticed. And before we get into discussion, let's have a quick poll, because we would like to know your opinion on today's topic. The question we would like to throw at you is, do you think EU member states should have lethal autonomous weapon systems? Please let us know your opinion now. You can't see the screen. I'll let you know once we have a few more contributors. We're at 11 contributors now, but there's more people in the room, so please log on to Slido and let us know what's your opinion.
Desperately. Changing the outcome.
Okay, I think we can already make an estimation of the final outcome. We have at the moment 60% of people saying yes, they should have it, 65 even, and we have 40% of people saying no, the EU member states should not have it. So this room is in favor of the EU actually having lethal autonomous weapon systems. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion. We will keep that result in mind for later. And as you can imagine, this is very much about definitions. What is a lethal autonomous weapon system exactly, and what is not? And I think it makes a lot of sense for us to first of all get up to speed, and this is why we start with a briefing by Frank on what we're actually talking about.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I will briefly walk over here and switch to where we need to be. Excellent. It works.
Okay.
next 15 minutes or so will be to clear up some of the confusion and to get us all on the same page so that we know what we're talking about, which is always very helpful because I'm sure that in our collective minds all kinds of acronyms and terminologies are swirling around. We've already heard about the lethal autonomous weapon systems or laws. Maybe some of you even have heard the term killer robots. What is it that we're talking about actually? And you will find that the way I phrase the issue is that I like to talk about autonomy in weapon systems. So I will explain to you what autonomy in weapon systems is, what it does. That will be the first big chunk of the time of these 15 minutes. And then I will talk briefly about the implications of autonomy in weapon systems. What does it mean if we have autonomy in specific functions of weapon systems? And thirdly, I will lose 2 or 3 sentences maybe about what I think that should be done about the issue, especially from a European EU point of view. Okay, so let's dive right in. This is a very neat and systematic way to think about the issue. What you see here is what in military circles is called the targeting cycle, right? So probably you've all heard about the so-called ODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. This is basically the same thing, but in a sort of different terminology. Every armed force around the globe is using it, even though some are calling it a bit differently. I'm using the NATO terminology here. It is F2T2EA, find, fix, track or target, engage, and assess. Assess is very small, it's not really interesting to us. But what is important for you to understand is that this is the way a military target is defeated, right? So it will always go through that cycle. Doesn't matter what the target is, doesn't matter how long it takes, right? So if your target is Osama bin Laden, you might spend a lot of time with the finding part, whereas if your target is an incoming mortar shell, you will have to be running through the cycle fairly quickly. Okay, so this is what always happens when a military target is being attacked, and what actually goes on is finding, which usually means that you will have to move your weapon system within the vicinity of the target. Fixing meaning picking the target that you think should be defeated, and tracking it in case of it moving. And we're of course talking about new technologies here, so I will show you now a very brief example of what can be done to speed up this targeting cycle by implementing specific new technologies in this process, right? So let's have a look at this. Now, what you see here, it's a maritime environment, and basically you see that you're not seeing anything, really, right? But now, we have this very neat red rectangle being drawn around the white dot that probably you with your eyeballs weren't able to discern from the background before, whereas for a simple image recognition algorithm, that's actually a very easy thing to do. And so you see that only by doing that, by showing the operator, here is something that probably you didn't see before, but I can point that out to you. We have sped up the targeting cycle. We have now a very quicker passage through the finding and the fixing and the tracking of the target. And now we move on, and we are going to go to the selection and engagement of target. And this is actually where the interesting discussion is raging. So selecting means, of course, selecting the target for a weapon's deployment, and engaging is releasing the weapon towards the target. Jamie Shea is nodding, so I'm probably doing something right. And you will find that this is at the core, conceptually speaking, of what full autonomy in weapon systems is, or what a lethal autonomous weapon system is, or what a killer robot is, or however you, at the end up, naming it. This is what we're talking about. Okay, so full autonomy in weapon systems is the selection and engagement of targets without human intervention. Okay, I will repeat this. Fully autonomous weapon systems select and engage targets without human intervention. This is how the DoD Directive 3000.09, released by the Department of Defense in 2012, goes at the issue conceptually speaking. This is how the International Committee of the Red Cross is thinking about this. The ICRC is calling these the so-called critical functions within the targeting cycle. And this is, in essence, what the debate is about in Geneva at the United Nations. right? So we're talking about weapon systems that select and engage targets without human intervention. The human is, even if he or she is involved in this targeting cycle in the beginning with the finding and fixing and tracking maybe, he or she, the human, is no longer interfaced with the weapon system with regards to selection and engagement, if you want to talk about a weapon system that is fully autonomous. Okay? So now we've got that established, and now there's, of course, basically the twist, which is, this is neither new, although we're now newly, having a discussion about it. This is neither new nor is it problematic per se, right? We have had this functionality in weapon systems for quite a while. You could go back 30 years or so to systems kind of like those. Okay, this is just a stand-in. Basically, this is the German Mantis system. It is not operated in a fully, automated or autonomous mode. But you could easily imagine, we will see the rectangle again. Basically, this is kind of like the thing that we just saw, the small red rectangle. We've had defensive systems selecting and engaging targets without human intervention for 30 years. Okay, we even already have things called loitering munitions. The Israeli Harpy is a good example for that. That do select and engage targets without human intervention. Okay, so this loitering munition, for instance, is looking for specific radar signatures. You launch it into the air, it circles, it's picking up a specific radar signal, it dives down, explodes, tries to destroy the target without any human remotely operating the system or having any sort of supervision even, maybe, over what happens. So we have been there, but it has been a very niche capability. What has changed is, in fact, the advent of specific new technologies, specifically image recognition and what comes along with that. And the debate we're having is basically about this function of selection and engagement of targets without human intervention, leaving the niche and potentially proliferating into all sorts of weapon systems, right? So you could imagine like any new fighter jet or tank or submarine or speedboat having some functionality built in that would allow you to select and engage targets without human intervention. So we see that, and that has been mentioned before, there are specific opportunities connected to this from a military point of view. You are, of course, increasing the speed with which the targeting cycle is completed. That's a huge tactical advantage. There are additional things coming along with this, like force multiplication. And we have, of course, this very interesting function of defense, where I think full autonomy in weapon systems is not a problem. As I said, it is not a problem per se. We can use it to defend incoming munitions. We have been doing that, and we should be doing that going into the future. However, what we're seeing right now in terms of the development and the increasing autonomy in weapon system is a spin-in of civilian technology into the military realm. It's called civil-military fusion, and it's a big deal for the US as well as China, and we're talking about it in Europe, of course, leveraging civilian innovation for military purposes. And as I said, we're now talking about the however. So what are the potential downsides of having full autonomy in weapon systems in an unregulated fashion? So let's basically imagine an ecosystem where every weapon system can be switched basically by a software ticking a box to a fully autonomous mode. One of the key problems really is that especially in the debate about AI in the military, many people have a very skewed understanding of what the technology actually is and what it does. Like the XKCD comic is supposed to show you that machine learning's got nothing to do with learning, artificial intelligence has got nothing to do with intelligence. So delegating this decision of selection and engagement of targets over to a machine can potentially be connected to huge risks. Okay, so again, some upsides as for defense, but huge risks as well if we imagine that we go into a future where autonomy weapon systems continues in an unregulated fashion. One of the key risks, really, this should not have happened. As I said, technology, don't rely on it too much, especially with regard to life and death decisions. So one of the key things, and I will only talk about two risks specifically, one of the key things is unintended escalation, right? So from a strategic point of view, the Chinese have coined a beautiful term for this. They call it the Battlefield Singularity, which is when all the operations on the battlefield have, increased up to a speed where human cognition is no longer able to follow what is happening. So you can easily also understand that there's no way any longer to intervene. And we've had, let's say, trouble with algorithmic interactions or algorithmic decision-making processes in the civilian realm for quite a while. One of the main examples usually you can find in the literature is the phenomenon of so-called flash crashes, which is a phenomenon at the stock market where either due to one algorithm malfunctioning or two algorithms interacting in an unforeseen way, you have things like the pound plummeting, a couple of points, and value basically being destroyed. It's not a life and death issue, but it's an annoyance. But if you imagine that we're putting this sort of machine decision-making capability into a military realm, and we remove the human completely from the equation, we are also removing a fail-safe from this equation. So that would be one of the key things that serious military people are concerned about, that we introduce all sorts of operational and even strategic risks into our military if we, in fact, in an unregulated manner, use full autonomy in weapon systems across the board. That would be one of the main risks that that I think everybody should be aware of. The other one would be basically an ethical point of view. Because make no mistake, if we delegate the decision to kill another human being on the battlefield, even if that is done in a completely legal fashion, combatants can be killed under international humanitarian law. If we delegate this, I think we are infringing on this fellow human being's dignity. It is the ultimate indignity to be killed by an anonymous algorithm in a machine. If we kill people on the battlefield, I think the least thing that we owe to these fellow human beings is to recognize that they die as humans. Machines do not know what life is. They do not understand what it is to take a human life. And so this decision should not be delegated, full stop. I think we are infringing on very basic human rights, and especially I think from a European point of view and a liberal point of view, I think this should concern us very much and should be cause for regulation. And it seems that this is, outside of this room at least, quite a popular opinion. These are the newest numbers. These are 1 week old. So this is a couple of European countries, and you can see that there's widespread public support for a regulation on this phenomenon. Full autonomy in an unregulated fashion in weapon systems is nothing that is particularly popular with European countries. Okay. So let me just say two closing sentences about maybe the European position on this and what can be done. So probably you're all aware that there is already a 2018 European Parliament resolution on the issue that calls for finding a common position, and which also states what this common position should be. It should be a ban on full autonomy in weapons or positive obligation on retaining meaningful human control over weapon systems with regard to the critical functions of the targeting cycle. I know it is very technical, but you now know what that means, right? So meaningful human control over the critical functions of the targeting cycle. That is what we need. If you don't like ban killer robots, this is the positive obligation. This is, I think, what Europe should be doing, should be signaling to the rest of the world that this is how the EU thinks this new function should be governed. And just as a final idea maybe to throw into the room, there is one specific project where this is, I think, a very pertinent question, and that's the Future Combat Air System, which is a huge defense undertaking, a German, French, Spanish cooperation. And it will, in essence, be a system of systems. It will be a fighter jet, which will be piloted by a human, but be surrounded by a swarm of unmanned, wingman systems, and there will all sorts of autonomy be in there, for sure, and should be. But this is, I think, the specific one project where, as a human signal to the rest of the international community, we have an opportunity to say, this is how we think it should be done. These are the opportunities that we think we should be using, and these are the risks that we think we should be guarding against. So that would be my final food for thought. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Frank. This was a great start. So, before we jump into discussion, just a quick follow-up question on your presentation. You've made your position, your opinion pretty clear, what you should go for and what you should not go for. You said that there should be meaningful control over the targeting cycle, but you also said that it's okay if you have defensive systems which are fully autonomous. This is also what the European Parliament said last year. They said defensive systems, for example, ship-mounted ones, are okay, but they should not be directed at human-inhabited aircraft. So they could fire against a missile, but they should not fire against aircraft. So I have a background in the Navy. I have taken part in many exercises where we were approached by aircraft and we had to find out if those aircraft were actually attacking us or if they were just confused or whatever. How can a computer know that? How do you make that difference, technically, when it comes to anything approaching on such a defensive system?
I mean, how do they do it now? I mean, we've got friend-of-foe transponders, all kinds of systems that would analyze the characteristics of a specific target, the signatures, all these things. We already have that. And since you're talking German Navy, as I said, nothing about this is necessarily very new. It's just that it is basically now being put on steroids, and that's why it should concern us. And if you look at, for instance, German frigates, they have a system which I think has 3 modes. It's called manual, semi-automatic, and automatic. I still haven't met any German Navy officer who had ever flipped the switch to automatic. So there's specific doctrine in how you operate these systems. And you would in most cases not flip that switch and have the system fully autonomously or automatically. I actually don't care which term you use. Some other people make a big fuss about autonomous, automatic. Talk to the technical people. There's no clear delineation between automaticity and autonomy. But that's a side note. And so your question really goes to the kind of discussion we have to have about this. And I think it should be a very informed, differentiated discussion, and depending on specific context. And some people will say, but isn't it a gross military disadvantage to not use this functionality when all the other people are doing it? And I would say, no. Specifically, when you are deliberately initiating a targeting cycle and trying to attack a specific target, there's no real reason not to have meaningful human control over the targeting cycle. However, if you are on a German frigate and there's like 300 contacts coming in, and all you can do basically to survive is flip the switch and have the system fire, and maybe there's a manned aircraft, in there, then I would basically say, well, at the end of the day, our soldiers, we owe them, the technology to save their lives, and this is how it goes. So I'm not saying you have to die for, this highfalutin, notion of meaningful human control, but I think the standard should be that humans are legally responsible, ethically accountable, and still engaged in terms of waging war, attacking targets, maybe killing people. That is what I'm saying.
All right, thanks for clarifying. I see people have started to ask questions. Please continue to do so. The more questions we have later on, the better. I'd now like to turn to you, Hannah. We'd like to learn more about your stance. What do you think the EU should actually do, how it should position itself? And we've talked a bit over lunch, so I have an idea what you think. Here you have a room which is in favor of the EU actually having autonomous weapon systems. So we are looking forward to hearing your response to that.
I guess I need to use that one. Thank you, Sebastian. First of all, I think in this debate we shouldn't confuse two things. The one thing is, do we think AI can do a lot of good to us as a society? And there, I would say yes. There are many, 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 many things that AI can do to make our lives better, to help us protect the climate, to help us be more secure, and so on. But I think we should take up the task to question that every time. So where does it lead us? And I think there's the area of killing human beings, where I would put into question whether we have to be more effective, more efficient, and faster. And there I would say no. There are many things we can do better with AI. I think killing humans shouldn't be amongst them. That's an ethical boundary, which I think we always have to keep in mind when we discuss what is technically possible, what is not possible, what are doing others. The second thing is, and that's why I was very happy that you had this clarifying introduction, is there still seems to be a confusion about AI in weapon systems. And I think that is clearly the distinction in the debate that we have to do. One is it for defensive or for attacking purposes that we use that automated functions? And the second one is, are we using AI to see better where we are shooting at? Are we using AI to have better information on where the others are? Are we using AI on all these like finding aspects of the targeting circle? Or do we really want to use it for determining whom we shoot at and shooting at? And there, on these last two steps, I would say we should be very clear that should be humans that are in charge of it for the dignity aspect, but also, and that is, now we're moving a bit away from the ethical aspects, also the practical things. You said, and I found that very interesting because that's the question I often get. So, I mean, then we just have these killer robots and they fight at each other, and I mean, we put them on a separate field and let them just fight and sort it out, and who has the best killer robots gets away with it. The problem is that is not the way we are currently doing warfare. At the moment, states have an interest in eliminating critical infrastructure and eliminating critical persons. I think eliminating is the wrong word, but that's what it's about. And that is something that cannot be done on a separate field where we just let these robots sort things out amongst themselves. And that is where it gets tricky, because, and that's something we forget, the better we get in these autonomous weapon systems, killing automatically, the cheaper the stuff is, the easier the proliferation is, the bigger the harm is if others hijack these systems or hack themselves into the systems, and the bigger is the threat that others have it who might also kill people and attack our critical infrastructure. So you have seen it with the drones that have attacked in Saudi Arabia all the oil facilities. That were just simple, easy, rather easy, to buy drones that flew these attacks. And this is the box that we opened when we developed this technology. And then there's the argument, you raised it, but if the others do it. Well, I mean, first of all, I think we can only stop the others doing it if we say we don't want to have it, we are not doing it, and now please you also don't do it, because it's a matter of trust. And it's a bit of the same argument and cycle that from my side we had with the atomic and the nuclear weaponry system, where I still think wisely, as the Germans, I know it's a bit different with the other European countries, said we promote regulation, we're not going to have it. And we see now, if it's developed with the atomic bombs, I mean, these regulations only hold for a certain while. We are now in a situation where we might actually have a new arms race when it comes to the nukes, and I just don't want to have us have the same thing with the armed weapon system. So now there are a few, but I think we still have the possibility, if we get our guts together and promote very much a ban on also developing it and having them, and we could still move a bit out of the danger zone.
for your assessment. Indeed, I was about to raise that point. From Russia comes the announcement that they would like 30% of their weapon systems to be operated fully autonomously by 2025, which is in only 6 years' time. So at a time where our Baltic and Polish partners are not always reassured that we are really able to defend them, at a time where we don't get very far with any negotiations with Russia, can we really afford not to mesh their efforts to advance militarily? As a follow-up to challenge your assessment.
Well, but that's what I mean with defensive and offensive capabilities. I mean, I think we should, if we know they are coming up with the offensive lethal armed weapon systems, there's a difference between autonomous weapon systems and lethal autonomous weapon systems. I want also that to be clear, right? That's the last stage then, and that's the lethal one if you're doing the killing autonomously. Some do the selection autonomously, but you still need at least someone to press the button to execute in the end. So I don't like us to put money into defending against systems of which we don't think they should be there, but if others like the Russians develop them and we know they will have it at some time, I can understand why it's useful to put money into research and development and production of stuff that is defensive, and that is totally in line with the European Parliament position. But it's different from having offensive ones. And with the offensive ones, I think we as Europeans should not have them and very hardly promote that others will not have them either.
All right, thank you, Hannah. We'd now like to turn to you. We'll bracket our MEPs by our two researchers. Now we come to you, Samira. And we look forward to your assessment. What do you think? How should the EU and its member states position themselves towards autonomy in weapon systems, as we've learned is a term that makes a lot of sense?
Yes, thank you. Is it working? I think yes, okay. So thank you also for your presentation, and I think that, that given the numbers that you showed for the support given the European countries, that is why it is, I think, very important that in this resolution where you were already talking about, there was also stated that we need to have a joint statement. So we need to have a joint point of view on this, because obviously there's a division, and obviously we need also more clarity on what we exactly want with this. So you said it correctly. I am very interested, and I'm really focused in my work on the ethical side of technological solutions, and especially focusing on the protection of fundamental rights here. It is, of course, very profitable that we have these kind of technologies, and I'm in favor of technology and innovation. On the one hand, on the other hand, I'm a legislator, and I need to be an informed legislator, and we need to influence there where it is necessary. So about artificial intelligence, I come from the police. I've worked for the Netherlands police before I came in the European Parliament, and there we already had this development going on with predictive policing, with using artificial intelligence, but we also already had the critical questions on, for example, profiling. So the more negative consequences of that, and how do we deal with that? How do we make sure that we use technology not in a way that people are being targeted negatively? So when it comes to artificial intelligence also in defense, I have some critical points that I'd like to raise, and please feed me also, because like I said, I want to be informed and I also want to be inspired so that I can work together also with you in the Parliament on good legislation on this. So when it comes to the data, the input data, who is in control of that? What kind of data is being put in there? And this is exactly where these machines are going to be working on. So they will be based on the input data. And it's really important that this is also a reflection, a good reflection of society. Because you can imagine that if this data is not being differential, it's not being controlled by many aspects of society and by many different elements, it can be really selective. And you can imagine then why, for example, also during my work at the police, we had this discussion about predictive policing, yes, but who is then in control of the data. So the diversifying of the data is one a really important one, especially when we're speaking about machine learning and deep learning, because that's what's going on here. And then I think, in general, my point of view now, and also in the European Parliament, is that the whole discussion is about human control. So at the end, there needs to be human control to pay attention to the ethics and to make sure that these systems are not going to work that selectively that it does more harm than necessary. And I think at the end, we need to work with the private sector, we need to work with many other experts, universities, to work on a so-called, I'd say, artificial intelligence master plan. Because this week we had a very interesting roundtable with the European Parliament, where we also discussed that on this subject, where we also discussed that there's a lot of fragmentation now in the business. And especially when it comes to security and defense, we need to make sure that we have a framework that we agree upon, a framework that is being created by the right experts, by the right input, by the right expertise. But as long as it's really fragmented in the business, it's really hard to get to that framework. So I think the priority also here is also to gather a society, a platform for this specific subject, so that we can start to work on a first framework. Within we can work also on these systems.
All right, thank you very much, Samira. And I can already see there's basically two main questions that we're discussing along. The one is, how could an effective regulation actually look like? How should it look like? What elements of the target cycle should be regulated? What does meaningful human control actually mean, and where should it be applied? The other question is, how can the EU actually move their revisions forward within the international context? And I think this is a good point to pass the ball over to you, Raluca. If you Google your name, you will find some op-eds on the topic, and in one of them you write that by finding an effective way of regulating, you can actually take the lead and also shape other players' behavior. Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that, please.
Thank you very much for having me here. Quite inspiring themes and topics. To be a little bit controversial, maybe. Yesterday I heard an expression in terms of regulating AI. It's like regulating the sea. I don't know what to take out of this, in the sense that I understand that AI is a daunting challenge. Understanding it, coming from more of a social scientist or policy background, that definitely doesn't require some technical skills. I think that in our discussions, and several discussions going on right now, there are several points that I would like to emphasize. One is AI as a definitional target. Everyone understands something else under the sun, and every technology that is exciting and new is enabled AI. That is in the business sector as well, startup community, or even more in the policy domain. So that would be understanding, opening actually the black box of AI, then looking at AI as more of a blanket term and gathering different types of technologies, and secondly, looking at AI as this enabler technology and its dual use characteristics. Because I have personally a problem in associating AI and defense, AI and diplomacy, AI and this and AI and that. So in that sense, thank you very much for the clarifications in terms of what we understand, for example, with autonomous weapons systems, and making certain qualitative differences about how to understand artificial intelligence and also its potential applications. And here, another topic that I picked up in the discussions is spinning in technological innovation coming from the civilian sector. And here I think another interesting idea comes to mind, in the sense of weaponizing, or at least this discourse of weaponizing innovation for the interest of state security, or for contributing, or at least catching up in the global arms race, that is not actually going to happen, but is already going on, at least in terms of how the national policies of big states and also big EU member states frame the discussion. And here, weaponizing technological innovation for military and security purposes is not something new for sure. We had this with the evolution of military affairs, and trying to harness this potential, of course, to give you a certain edge in warfare. And here, for sure, this is a matter of framing. It's a matter of discourse, because if you emphasize this idea that we are now in a survival mode and others are investing in certain weapons, lethal autonomous weapons, and so on, if we do not catch up, if we lag behind in this, of course, we will also be in peril. This is, again, contributing to a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And we saw that in different weapons and their arms race related to that. And for sure, to shift this discourse and the narrative at the global level, you have certain tools and mechanisms. And then this is the third topic that actually came to mind during these discussions. How to impose certain limits, bans, regulate, or also push forward certain standards, ethical standards, values, and norms that we hold dear. And for sure here in Western Europe, because what for us certain values mean, for others maybe something else. But here I think the EU can play an interesting role for sure in terms of putting forward ethical principles, normative frameworks, the work of the European Commission in that regard, and developing ethical guidelines more for civilian applications of artificial intelligence, and how to understand the technology in terms of its social-political impact and the risk associated with that, and how they impact the users and protect their rights and privacy is quite important. And you have different agencies, institutions putting forward vision papers, strategies, ways to look at it from a European Union perspective. But my question here, and here is the controversial element, is how do you actually implement these guidelines, ethical rules, standards, norms into actual regulation? So that is one thing. How do you bring to the table, and you as an institution, also member states that do not share actually a common approach to certain AI applications? And here it's not only necessarily weapon systems or lethal autonomous weapon systems. And here I think also engendering a public debate, a public awareness, and I definitely agree with that, with the role of the European Parliament to raise awareness about the risks and negative consequences of this type of technologies can be a way ahead. But as a researcher and looking at some policy outputs, certain terminology, and here I think vocabulary matters a lot, I hear a lot the words technological supremacy in Europe, need to catch up, race, we are falling behind. What does this mean? What does this mean also in terms of security and defense? Who can actually be of help to catch up in this regard? And here, new players in the security and defense domain, like big tech, new tech, and so on. How is this new relationship negotiated in the future, and how do you actually regulate more the dual-use characteristics of this dimension? So for me, all these questions are part of research. I do not have an answer for sure, and everyone or anyone that claims to be an expert in this very fast-evolving domain is for sure, let's say, putting the carts before the horse, because what we see is the technology evolving. With that, we need also innovative and flexible ways in terms of organization, concepts, to adapt to this fast-pacedness. And at the same time, in terms of regulation, this is one question that I might have as well, maybe as a challenge. How do we devise regulation that also evolves with the complexity of the technology and can anticipate or prevent certain problems? So I leave it at this, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Raluca. I think Hannah wants to respond to you right away.
It's not that much. Maybe just a complimentary remark, because the good thing is I mean, regulating AI is like regulating the sea, fair enough, but now we're talking about lethal weapon systems, which is a very tiny part of AI, so that is like regulating big vessels that take all the fish out of the water, and we managed to do that. Because there we actually nailed it down, and there's an organization called IPRA that clearly defines what we're talking about, and that clearly defines how we can regulate it, and what the critical functions are, and what meaningful human control is. So there has been a lot of work done in recent years. So what we are lacking is the political will of member states and of other states that are not member of the European Union to actually regulate it. But I think we should at no point, especially as politicians, and that's what differs me from you there, give up the idea that we can regulate stuff that is out there but harmful to our societies. Because then there is no reason for us being there, we just let it run because we think it's too complicated or others may not join.
Before we go to your questions, thank you so much for that already, I'd like to come back to the element of meaningful human control. AI, or autonomy in weapon systems, is very much about the speed advantage it gives you in military terms. That's what I understood from your presentation, because then you can go faster than human cognition would usually allow you. And in many cases, it comes down to meaningful control has to be exercised over the actual engagement, which means shooting. But yeah, you've already touched on that. What if the machine, during its learning process or based on the data it has, comes to, or it adapts human biases? Let's say there's a machine that believes that a Muslim is more likely to be a terrorist. And that might lead to the fact that a Muslim is more likely to be proposed as a target. So how can we still benefit from this speed advantage without running the risk of having those kinds of ethical problems?
Right. Thanks for throwing me that softball. So maybe I'd start by saying another thing. You were saying that the technology is, increasing, is developing so rapidly, and can regulation be in step with that? Yes, yes, and 3 times yes, because as a matter of fact, the scholarly debate on the entire issue is at this point more or less technology agnostic. So I will put this, in the clearest terms. If you can use sticks and stones to make your weapon system select and engage targets without human intervention, then it's a fully autonomous weapon system. You don't need AI. Actually, we've had full autonomy in weapon systems for 30 years. And, mark my words, Patriot, Mantis, there's no machine learning in there. As a matter of fact, most weapons designers won't touch machine learning with a 10-foot pole because it's terrible. So let me talk about technology real quick, because that's another terrible misconception about what we're talking about. I said this again really briefly, some of you were laughing. Artificial intelligence has nothing whatsoever to do with the way we understand intelligence as a human species. Machine learning has nothing to do with learning, right? I have a 4-year-old, I can tell her that's a tiger. She will know what a tiger is, because from then on she will have an abstract concept of tigerness. We don't even know how to do that in terms of machine learning. Machine learning means optimizing data with statistical methods to do one specific and very specific task, and do that and only that. And these systems fail miserably as soon as you try to have them do something else. They are greedy, they are brittle, and they are opaque. Greedy means they need huge amounts of data. We don't have these data in the military realm. We will have then train the neural networks on simulation data, which is a whole mess in itself. They are brittle, which means, as I said, they will fail as soon as you set them on a task that they're not optimized for. And they are opaque, which means we don't really know why they are producing the output that they are producing. So again, terrible idea to hand over life and death decisions to that sort of technology. And this is if you understand the technology, and then you can forget about it again, because all we need to regulate is the function. And the function means selection and engagement of targets, which is the relationship between the human and the weapon system. And it actually doesn't matter what specific neural network is in there, or is it, I don't know, a quantum computer? It doesn't matter. The key question that we need to answer is, who does what when? Okay, meaningful human control. We're talking about meaningful human control. To wrap our heads around meaningful human control, and I'm not saying it's easy, And I was saying it's a differentiated discussion, and we will have to decide on what meaningful human control is depending on context. There's no one-size-fits-all meaningful human control. But to wrap our heads around it, we will have to answer that question. Who does what, when? When is the machine making decisions? When is the human making decisions? That is what we need to do. That is actually what the scholarly debate is doing, what the expert circles are talking about. These are the, the deep dives into specific contexts in terms of coming up with techniques, tactics, procedures on how to operate these weapon systems, so that at the end of the day we can have, the increased speeds and have, reap the benefits of using this technology. And again, I'm completely, with you in terms of we can increase precision, so we can maybe have weapon systems that can, be more compliant with IHL, be more precise. We can have force multiplication. We can have all these nice things that militaries like. But we will also, I am sure, find a way to come up with implementing meaningful human control over our weapon systems, rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater because we're thinking, ooh, there's a big AI hype race and Europe needs to get on board. That is exactly what we should not be doing. I don't know if I answered the question, but maybe I did in there somewhere.
The question?
Sure.
I was wondering, how do you see, or which forums, international forums, are best suited to actually push forward this agenda?
Very good. You can't see it, but it's the top-rated question
okay.
here, and I was going to ask it anyway. Perfect.
Because it's quite interesting. This is there is a debate going on, and rightly so, at the EU level and in the European Parliament. Just yesterday, there was a discussion exactly about human meaningful control and regulation, and we need to push forward ethical principles. And this is highly, in a way, it's taken for granted sometimes that yes, we need to value the humans in this discussion, and there are technical solutions as well to put forward, ways to go about approaching the technology. But the question, or at least the skeptics in the room, were always questioning how do you make other big global powers, coming to your own like-mindedness and vision about the priorities about these autonomous weapons systems should be the ban and things like that. And some of the solutions would have been, again, having this European position, strong position in this international fora, pushing forward to banning the technology. But is this feasible, realistic in the long run, if we see previous examples with the nuclear weapons as well? In the sense, we know their disruptive potential, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we were able to impose certain rules at the international level to ban their development and use.
Yeah, maybe we can ask our two MEPs. The European Parliament resolution calling for a ban, international ban on lethal autonomous weapon systems is more than a year old. It has not gone very far so far, I'm afraid to say. Only Austria within the EU has accepted it, and the CCW, Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, the UN body we mentioned before, talks haven't gone very far either. How do you look at it? How do your political groups look at it? Maybe you can switch to Samira. How have you refined your strategies? What could be a political way to go forward?
Yes, well, two things. Look, I understand what you were saying, and I understand where that is coming from. But on the other hand, I think there's also a lot of misunderstanding. There's also fear in society about all these developments. People don't know exactly what this is about, because this is a niche. This is not something that everyone can be an expert on. But at the same time, everyone sees that there's something growing. Everyone sees that there's these developments going on, and they can get a hold on that. So it is, I think, therefore really important that still we start to inform our society better on this, and that we educate also society in this. This is also what we've been discussing in the roundtable. in the parliament is that we need also an educational system in which society is being informed and educated on this. So that can also take away the fear that is also now present towards this specific subject. And then the second, also to answer your question, is that I think we need to put it also in the right order if we speak about a future framework. I think first we need to have like a shared understanding, and then I think I also come to your point, of the risks and the benefits of this. So there needs to be a joint understanding first. And then we can work and speak with all the stakeholders about a possible framework. I think there's my conclusion is, and that is also I think why we did not have a lot of progress yet, that the developments are going so fast, fragmentation, also a lack of expert, I'd say, in our own institutions that can inform us well, and we need to invest in that first. So what are the developments exactly? What does it mean? Indeed, who is responsible for what and when? All these crucial questions. And then you can start to work on this framework. So I think also when we as legislators want to make progress, we need to invest also in our own knowledge, of course, and we need to invest in educating and informing society on this.
You've apparently advanced quite far, because the Netherlands were among the countries that were mostly for a ban of autonomous weapon systems. How do you look at it?
I would like to frame it a little different, because I think we are at the moment where we have answered most of this question, and it's a matter of political will. And it's nice that the European Parliament issues this resolution, but we know whenever it comes to negotiations on the ground, it's large member states that have to pick it up, and I would have loved to have someone from France sitting here to discuss this issue, because they are those who are actually developing this stuff. And I think, first of all, if you fight for a ban, and if you want to fight for a ban, the best thing is not to produce the stuff yourself. And the second one is to put it high on the agenda of political priorities. I mean, let's talk about chemical weapons. They are rather easy to produce. They are rather easy to use. But it's crystal clear to everyone, once you use them, you're an outlaw. We could have the same agreement on lethal armed weapon systems if only we wanted to. That's what I mean with it's a matter of political will. We have the definitions, we know what is good, what is not good, we might have some gray margins, but they are not too large. But now we need to have the political will united behind it to say, if you do this, you're an outlaw.
I definitely agree. It's definitely also a matter of political will, but I do think, and that is why I think the question of you was so crucial to you in the specific case of when someone looks Arabic, does he or she has more chance to be? Well, but these are the realities that these questions are being raised in society, even though if they're right or wrong. And that's why I think that also your presentation and your explanation needs to be more broadcasted also in society.
More TV shows.
Broadcasted, I was looking for the right word. But we cannot ignore that these questions are being raised in society. These are the questions that we need to answer, even though they are right or wrong. And then yes, at the same time, political will needs to be there. But if only the political will is there, and there's too much unwillingness and too much fear in society given these developments, I think it's going also to be hard to have the legitimation for this, even for putting it on the agenda continuously.
To wrap this up, I know, Frank, you're closely following the CCW meetings. What's your impression that you get from those meetings? We're very pessimistic here, but how are they actually proceeding?
It's hard not to be more and more pessimistic about it. I mean, what has been decided last week is that the next 2 years in Geneva will be spent talking about and it is now called actually aspects of. We have to thank Russia for this. So they watered it down even more. So the next 2 years will be spent talking about aspects of a normative and operational framework on and then there's a whole, emerging technologies in the field of lethal autonomous weapon systems. So 2 more years in Geneva will be spent talking about aspects of a normative and operational framework to, in some shape or form, in a most definitely non-binding way, govern the issue. And there will for sure, be interesting exchanges, interesting, probably, maybe even, I hope, case studies on what I was saying before, how can we make meaningful human control a positive obligation, put that into some sort of, language that hopefully, down the road, probably not in the next 2 years, maybe not in the 2 years after that, coming out of Geneva, have some sort of, binding character. But this is probably what we can imagine in the next 2 years or so. And with Russia, pushing back on all fronts while they're building their robot army, which will be ready in 2025. In all seriousness, I wouldn't hold my breath for that. But yeah, that is what's going on in Geneva. And if I may, maybe one final remark. Like 3 days ago or 4 days ago, there was an expo in Dubai, an arms expo, and a U.S. Air Force General Goldfein, presented. They call that the kill chain. It's the same thing as a targeting cycle, and he presented the fully automated kill chain. Basically a technology demonstration where a space-based asset picked up a target, relayed the coordinates to a surveillance plane. The plane fixed on the target, and then tasked a naval destroyer to launch a weapon at the target. And Goldfein said in his statement, this happened at machine speed, at the speed of light, machine-to-machine communication. And he said the first human to enter that kill chain was the person on the naval destroyer pushing the button to actually launch the weapon. Now, why are they doing this? Because this is the doctrine as of now, right? So as of now, according to the Directive on Autonomy Weapon Systems 3000.09, you require what in America is called appropriate levels of human judgment, which is yet another way to phrase it. But you can see that at least the US, as of now, feels strongly compelled to keep the human in control over the critical functions. And if this time window closes, we will probably not put the genie back in the bottle. As of now, we can still take that norm, foster it, strengthen it, and make it, just as you were saying, something akin to the strong norm or the taboo against using chemical weapons on the battlefield. This is where we need to be going, and I still think there is a window open for that. But you can see, we're pretty far down the road in terms of automating almost everything.
Right, thank you, Frank. I hope we have responded well to that question of Anonymous and his or her 5 supporters. We will certainly try to have a French speaker here, Hannah, next time.
Not a speaker, someone who represents the French doing stuff.
Got it. Okay. Let's move on to further questions from the floor. We work with Slido, but you may also feel welcome to raise your questions from the floor if you'd like to do so. Jamie Shear, please.
Many thanks. Sorry, I'm not a techie at all, so I prefer the old-fashioned voice and microphone, if that's okay. But first of all, many thanks to you, many thanks to the panel. Very, I wouldn't say entertaining, because that's not the right word, but extremely informative session. My question goes a little bit to what Hannah was saying earlier, which is warfare, of course, is not just the kinetic kill stuff, although unfortunately there's still plenty of that. It's much more the hybrid type of scenarios where you're trying to get inside the other person's system, manipulate their information space, disrupt their critical infrastructure. You said this quite very well, play on the cyber networks. And so my interest would be not just to learn more about how AI affects robots and autonomous weapon systems, but also how it plays into the ability to disrupt that type of domestic economic information space. How AI complicates hybrid warfare. For example, in the cyber area, does it sort of make offensive cyber much more dangerous than what we've known before? That's the first question. And if I may, being a bit greedy, so I really don't have to master the Slido. When it comes to what Hannah was saying about France developing systems, when we look at obviously the EU now spending a lot more money in the next few years on defence research, PESCO, European Defence Fund, all of these kind of things, are the countries coming up with projects in the military AI space, and what type of projects, and are they likely to also help the European Union more generally to adopt a sort of a moral high ground stance internationally on AI norms and regulation? So many thanks indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would you like to see respond?
N'importe qui.
N'importe qui. Qui veut?
I can take up the second one with the EU funding. Maybe the first one on how AI plays into all this hybrid warfare. I might not be the expert, but I hope someone else is up here. We're seeing the PESCO projects, and we're seeing especially the European Defence Fund, which will be the large bunch of money that's coming up with the next multi-national financial framework. With relation to lethal armed weapon systems, so we will have to see to what extent it works with the EDF. There will be an ethical committee that will check the proposals that may receive funding against such questions. However, we are not fully knowledgeable yet, and I think they don't have the full set of criteria for this ethical framework. And what I could see is they are mostly trying to use the ethical standards that you have for civilian research and development, and trying to put it on the defense, which I'm a bit skeptical to what extent it works, but it relates with the whole thing that it's research and development, and it's not military, because the EU is not allowed to fund military in theory, and I mean all the debates that are around that. The main problem I see there is the issue of transparency. Because for reasons I still do not understand, and that make me very mad, the European Parliament has given up the power to check what is actually funded with the European Defence Fund. So we requested for delegate acts, which is basically whenever they want to spend money on projects, they will have to come to the Parliament. It can be a transparent, it can be a public or an in-camera meeting, and then we look at it and then we say yes, 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 no, yes. Apparently that has been given up by EPP and Renew and ECR mainly. So now we give these 30 billion and we cannot check what is happening with it, which I think is very highly problematic. From how the thing is set out at the moment, lethal armed weapon systems are banned from this research and development. However, what we still didn't manage to clarify, and where I really think there's a big problem, they can develop stuff, and then you just add this little autonomous component, and then they can work autonomously, and that is not ruled out. So we are seeing that the same trickiness that we have in other areas, we will see there. With the PESCO project so far, what we get is little operative, so it's more like a joint command center or like sanitation, interoperability stuff. But I'm sure we will see more. But here at least, I think resolutions like that on lethal armed weapon systems will apply to the projects as well, because they are EP budget. What we are not covering, and that is, for example, that joint battle system of the French and the Germans, all these big bilateral projects that don't have funding from the European Union budget. We can't basically do anything about it except for raising public awareness and scrutinizing as much information as we can get.
Thank you, Hannah. Raluca, maybe you can respond to that first question, which we've heard.
Hybrid warfare. And for sure, I think that we observe old-age practices of disruption, propaganda, but mediated by a scalability of technology, a fast-pacedness and sophistication that sometimes it provides quite challenging difficulties to authorities. Who should be in charge of dealing with what? That's my question as well, and I'm interested in looking at it, because you have here again a multi-stakeholder approach to hybrid warfare. You have intelligence services, tech experts, the military, all playing into this game of how to deter, prevent, and so on. And I think that AI application in this field will for sure present more and more risks, because there is also the issue of tracing those potential attacks, the issue of anonymity as well, and state and non-state actors being involved in this game for sure. And I think that the main discussions nowadays focus on the problem of deep fakes, identifying what's right and what's wrong, and again, this I think can be answered, or at least in terms of EU approach, with another buzzword and a very popular one, this resilience idea. And I truly believe in this idea of educating, raising awareness, upskilling as well in terms of being more cyber literate, let's say, and also preparing state and non-state actors to this type of new challenges. And are our I don't know, is our public sector prepared to I don't know, come up with solutions and fast solutions to potential attacks? And here I see a potential of cross-institutional collaboration between EU and NATO, and there is already a hybrid fusion cell dealing with these issues, and also dealing with or bringing in new expertise from the tech private sector for sure. So that would be my answer. I don't know if it's a good one, but the first instinct would be this long-term resilience building for sure, but coupled with some expertise and capacity to deter this type of risks and threats.
All right. With a few minutes remaining, we have time for one last question by you.
Thanks. Me, I have a question which is related to the human side of psychology, let's say. You mentioned the dignity element, so when a decision should be taken to kill someone, and also someone will be killed. What about the elements that comes psychologically after that someone is killed? So a military is always a military, but is also a human being. Is there any study in this sense which can elaborate which will be the kind of reflection that the military does after having killed someone, and the machine for sure will not do, and which are the elements in this sense that can go in favor of banning this kind of robot? Thanks.
Thank you. Was it clear to you?
Yes. What I know, and where there have been loads of studies, when they try to, or what we see now, that basically the people who are making the decisions are no longer part of the battlefield. So you have these people basically, we have them mostly in the US, where they command certain drones that then select and shoot, and there's the human sitting in the US, whereas you have the drone in Somalia, and people just go to work, and then they kill people, and then they go and play tennis, and then they sit at the dinner table, which disjuncts them from the whole cruelty of war. And one could see it's less trauma for the people, but also that direct affection that leads to some of these human questions, like is it useful, what does it do to the other, and also the stress and the adrenaline and everything, it's not nothing, but it's reduced to the same that computer players would have. So that's how they would compare it back then. I don't think we yet have studies on when it's totally autonomous, because we don't officially have anything totally autonomous. But correct me if I'm wrong. But we have these studies when it comes to that, separating the places.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. With a view to the watch, it's slowly time to wrap up. And I would like to come back to our initial poll when we asked you if the EU should actually have lethal autonomous weapon systems. 80 minutes ago, 55% of you said yes, and 45% of you said no. And we would like to know if that has changed in any way. If our four speakers have made a difference to your opinion in one way or another. for arms producing companies, you can only vote once.
And non-autonomous weapons are also expensive.
It's a name fire.
I think we've done a bit.
We had 25 respondents before. A few people have escaped through the back door, so this might reduce.
I would just have liked to have someone speak up of those actually who are in favor in the recent discussion, because it would have spiced things up a bit.
We still have to look at that. There's someone from the...
There's someone in the back.
Sorry, maybe the question is wrong, because you were saying that on the pen you were saying that defensive lethal autonomous weapons are okay. So I said yes because I want lethal defensive.
Can you rephrase the question? It's totally responsive.
Yes.
Yeah, but then we would have to use show of hands, and then it would not be unanimous anymore. But next time, when we discuss with the French person in charge, we will have a new question.
Can we ask, Hannah, how would you have phrased it?
Do you think EU member states should have, but well, offensive is clear, lethal weapon systems. But no, the way it is. And then you would have to explain it. I mean, that's the bit, the trickiness, but me insistent that attack and kill others automatic.
But I would rephrase just more directly, are you in favor or not of this?
No, but the question, but there's this difference between, do we want to have these things to defend ourselves against others who have the things? Is another question that do we want to have things to have battles elsewhere and kill?
I think the problem really is that before this, an event such as this has actually happened, if you phrase the question correctly, no one understands. Because, I mean, probably the correct phrasing would be, should the EU possess weapon systems without meaningful human control in the critical functions of the targeting cycle? Right? No offensive, no defensive, no laws, no lethal, no killer robot, like literally this. And who would have voted on this? Like everyone would have, I don't know what you mean. And then you can't make a comparison. That's really the question. It's tricky. So,
all right, let us maybe agree just on this. We will just meet again. I will consult you on the framing of the question, and then we'll have another event on the topic soon, which we will have anyway. To close this debate, I'd like the four of you just to complete the following sentence with one word. In 10 years' time, offensive lethal autonomous weapon systems will be what?
Stigmatized.
Stigmatized.
He took it away from me. Stigmatized.
Stigmatized. A lot of agreement here. Samira.
Will be something. Will be something that we have not yet decided upon.
That was a very long word. And Raluca?
A reality. With the caveat that I'm quite pessimistic about how things are going. And to deter certain states to develop them for national security interests will be very difficult. And that's more the, let's say, pessimist in me. But I would like the kumbaya and to prevail in the end, so stigmatize in the end.
All right, thank you so much. There weren't many solutions we could actually come up with, but at least we became a bit clearer when it came to definitions, the current state of political negotiations, and it became a bit clearer what autonomy in weapon systems actually means. I think that helped all of us. So in this sense, I'd like to thank the four of you very much for making the effort and contributing here. I'd like to thank Elf for making this possible. And most of all, thank you for having contributed and participated. Thank you so much. Have a nice afternoon.